G'day and welcome to SBC's Unleashed, episode 5, Leading by Example. Tonight we've got Nico, Stefan, and myself, Mark, on the line. And Stefan will be hosting tonight. So, Stefan, it is over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome to this episode. I'm enjoying taking a break from snow shoveling, from looking outside, lots of snow. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with my mates about leading by example. And I would like to start with this famous quote: setting an example is not the main means of influencing others, it is the only means. And that really draws us into this core competency with the dimension of leading by examples. And when I read through that, two things really stuck out for me. It's about earned authority as a leader. And if you earn that, at the same time, you start modeling a desired behavior, right? You can't command. Yes, you can, but don't be surprised if people don't follow you. It's more about standing your ground, show up, and model a desired behavior that no culture initiative could ever induce into your enterprise or organization. So, diving a little bit deeper into those different aspects of leading by example, that means we as leaders, we should have patterns of expected behavior because they kind of set the tone, the direction people will follow us or will accompany us. And what's probably really important, and what I experienced in the past few years as well, is it creates a culture of people who will tell the truth. If they don't tell the truth, how do you get the right information, right? And in the end, it's probably about information coherence, no matter on a team level, on a team of team level, if we start scaling up, even up to a strategic level. So that means leaders are not only people developers, you are transforming your organization. You create a culture that really allows people to have this lean, agile mindset and not only reading it on a sheet of paper, but really exemplifying. You are a leader that earned that position, has power through this earning, has power through being respectful, showing trust, but also showing expertise and being active so that people are really contributing towards the overall engagement because it is about customer centricity. It's about generating value and delivering value at the right time, at the right space. And in the end, yes, it comes back to being an inspirational leader that kind of motivates people intrinsically to follow your example, to then have parts of the personal development journey, evolving them or developing them into leaders as well, right? If we look at measure and grow, we get lots of tips and hints what to look for, right? Be an insatiable learner, be authentic, be courageous, have emotional competence, right? Be close to your people so that you can allow decentralized decision making. You're not observing your people, you're not observing and doing micromanagement. You are really growing others. And if we go into those assessments provided by SAFE, you see there's a lot of stickers hanging or being attached to those different aspects, becoming a leader that shows the right pattern and the right behavior. Why should we do it? There's a reason in it. And that's also part of Measure and Grow. It's you create this environment that the organization, the people, the interaction, the collaboration really is adaptable to rapidly changing demands. And we all know a demand is a demand. As we start working on it, it might immediately change, it might change during the evolution. So, yeah, we should be leaders that act with honesty and integration and integrity, sorry, and leaders that really promote a performance orientation towards this value generation and value delivery. So always having in focus, we are customer centric. Everything we do, everything we exemplify through those patterns is also delivering better value at the right time, at the right spot. Why is it important? I ask myself as well, in which context might this expertise really be applicable? And it's through all my life. Every day, every minute, you assess yourself, like, what are your words, what are your actions, right? If they start deviating, I'm probably in some trouble because people hear something different than what they see. So I probably constantly, as a change agent or an SPC, I do my own gap analysis. I also get feedback from others, closing the feedback loop. Yeah, sometimes feedback hurts, right? That's brutal transparency and honesty. And in the end, it's my engagement and commitment. And that leads me back to what we already talked a little bit about during the different episodes is systems thinking. And I'm part of the system. I'm not outside. I'm part of the system. So what is my timely investment to improve my behavior, to close the gap between words and actions? So far, the introductory part, and I would hand over to Mark. What about your thoughts when it comes to this dimension and the context we're in?
So it's really interesting this week. I'm the first one on the Miro board doing the prep. So I get the first words on, and you guys have to figure out what space I've left you. And because of the crazy week I've had, I was the last on the board. And as I went through the preparation, I went, "You've already said everything I wanted to say." So I actually felt a number of times that I was literally going to say something you'd already said because I think it's so true. Um, but what's my comment on the when and which context? You can't begin your agile journey without a leader who can lead by example, right? And the foundational constraint on its ability to scale and flourish is your ability to find and nurture leaders at all levels who can also lead by example. Right? Wherever you start agile, you could start at just the team. That was my early days of life. We started with the team. We only needed a very junior leader to lead by example through a certain part of the journey. But if you want to extend through the organization, you've got to find more of those leaders. And so my answer is you always need this dimension in all contexts at every level of the organization. Whether or not you will achieve amazing business agility will not boil down to whether you do a good PR planning or a good stand-up or a good team topology. It will boil down to whether you can have amazing leaders who lead into the future by example.
I really like your statement, Mark, and that shows the potential we have in an organization through real leadership. And I can't read minds. Nico, your thoughts about this context?
Thank you, Stefan. It resonates a lot with me. The whole thing being in a model, and not only in your role as a leader. By the way, as an RT, you're a leader too. As an SPC, you're a leader too. It's not only about you being manager and being a leader. So, and even if you are in a role, it's about you as a person. So, for instance, it's not a mask you put on. So now I'm a leader. Now I have to be authentic. Now I have to be a leader by example. So in every action you do as a person, it counts. So also, how are you in social events? It's also important. Where do you show up? Not showing up somewhere means also you're doing something. It's like you cannot not communicate. So if you don't show up in important events, if you say, "Oh, the team is so important," but you never show up on a beer or whatever you do after work, or you do a social together, it's also something in your spare time, but still you are not leading by example. So you say something and you do something else, or you do not something. It's also not doing. Uh, Another context, so it's everywhere. What's written on the Miro, it's everywhere. But one context that's important for me, if you're in a meeting as a leader, how do you make sure that people talk equal time? So are you a leader going in a meeting and just talking, everybody to the walls and until it comes out the way you want to? Or are you really interacting? Are you really doing what you're saying, that it's important, the voice of the team. So, and in this meeting, how do you handle objections, or how do you handle feedback? It's really sometimes terrifying seeing people saying how open, agile, how they want to do discussions, and then in the meeting you realize they come late, they talk too much. When someone gives a feedback, they say, yeah, it's okay. I'm the boss. I know how it works. And the other thing, when I look to my kids, they are really great in seeing how people really are. And we have the skills too, and people have them somewhere. Seeing if you say something and doing something differently with your body language, even with your non-verbal language, and not only body language, the tone of the voice, etc. Kids are very great with that, and some people still. So they will realize if you just say something and not doing it. So it really resonated with me, Stefan, when you said you have to be a model and you have to earn it. If you earned it to be a leader, this means that you are with your full body, with your full soul a leader. And that's what it's about. So context everywhere.
There are a few keywords spinning around in my head now. I would like to pick them up later on, but first,
Mhm.
let's kind of show the overall picture of this dimension. Who would you be supporting and collaborating with? Yeah, let's go into the dimension of where we are. It's the area of engagement, right? So you mentioned it, Nico. Wherever you show up, wherever you are, you're probably being observed without noticing it. And the collaboration is not only one way from me to others, it's also closing again that feedback loop. You lead by example and you receive feedback immediately. You receive it intentionally, you receive it through looks, body language, speech, even the tone or the ambience you feel in a room, right? And for me, I dug a little bit deeper into it, and through my small research, I found a term: two-way learning, enablement to learn with and from one another. To learn with others is in the area of engagement, but then it exceeds that boundary, learning from each other, not only in their context. It's much, much more that people bring into you in your area, in your feedback, right? So that's my these are my thoughts. Brought a lot of thoughts in here, Mark.
Look, it's been a week where, sitting down to do this morning, leadership has been such a central topic in a lot of stuff that I've been doing with clients this week, that there were just things that were ringing to me, right? So, my first comment, if you're a leader at any level within the organization, your depth in the dimension is going to be foundational to enabling that depth in those you lead and scale your impact. There's only so much reach you can make yourself as a leader, but the more that you can enable other leaders, the more you can scale your impact. And I believe that you enable other leaders through what you model. And it's back to your comment about earned authority, right? What do you model? Do people see the impact of that style of leadership and want to emulate it? And every leader you develop who leads by example is another piece of the puzzle in terms of the journey you're on. And, back to both of you made this comment, leadership's not about your seniority. Leadership's about how you show up. You can lead those above you. You can lead those beside you. Right? If you're a coach, you should never have any authority, but boy, you can still show up as a leader. And, the importance of setting an example in how you show up in moments of leadership, you just can't understate it. And I think when you're thinking about, if you're looking at this dimension through that lens of we're trying to scale our implementation, don't necessarily just scale to the next logical part of the organization. Scale to the next place where you can find the right leaders who are able to take on the leadership and make it successful there. All right, there's no point trying to scale into an area of the organization without the right leadership. So you've got to find those who can be receptive, and then you've got to take them on that path.
I really like that what you said, Mark. And let me quickly throw in one of the examples I experienced here in Switzerland, because as a Swiss citizen, you have to serve in the army, right? So you meet with lots of civilians, citizens in uniform. And these guys, they have a mind, they have a brain. They come from different locations, from different levels of leadership. I've had NCOs, corporals, who were in the professional life at a higher rank that I was, right? So don't tell them how to lead in a certain area, but make them bringing in their expertise and their experience. And that creates, as you said, Mark, probably a different type of organization, different type of collaboration, and also a huge potential for the organizational growth, which we shouldn't neglect, which we shouldn't push aside while we are active and doing stuff. Yeah, it's was always impressive. Nico, you're to the point.
Yeah, yeah. On the Miro board, yeah, but now I have 500 different ideas and don't know where to start.
Okay, spell them
Um,
out.
so I don't know how it's with you. When I have a new mandate, I usually go to the coffee machine. I don't drink coffee, but you can find me there. I go out with a smoker. I don't smoke. I'm with the smokers because I want to know what the real organigram is. So who are the real leaders? How do they real work? And for that, yeah, as Mark said, you're a leader because of your actions, not because of your rank. Or you said it too. You have to earn it being a leader. It's not about your promotion. And with that, on any level you are, if you're an SPC, an RTE, or a Scrum Master, so you need your peers, you need your teams, you need a mentorship, you need a coaching. As a executive, where you are also a leader, you need much more a mentor and much more a coach, because there are much more politics there than there are on a team level. There are much more hidden plans and bonuses and you name it. So having the chance to think about who am I, it's also about feeding yourself. It's also dealing with yourself. So you can only lead others if you're able to lead yourself. And for that, you must know uh, how do I react. Last week, I reviewed a blog post of a colleague of mine. Was a German blog post. I really love that she says, if you are in a meeting, just go on a higher level and think about what are you doing now? How you're reacting? Why are you reacting? Is the time to react, or is the time to let others talk? I really love this idea of being able to go on a meta level. I know it's hard. I know for me too. I mean, passion. I talk faster, like now. I don't have time to go on a meta level, but it's also part of leadership that it's not about you. It's also about the others that you lead, that you want to grow, that yourself can just be quiet, step away, and think about it is the right moment. And for that, you need your peers. You cannot do it alone. Uh, one story I realized in our trainings, we always talk about you should never fully utilize the system because it's economic disaster. You should go around 80% or less, never do full utilization. And then while talking this to my peers, I realized, oh gosh, myself, I'm also overutilized. It was years ago. And now, since then, I think it's now 5 years ago, I always block 2 half days on my calendar with free. It's blocked free. And then before the week appears, they just disappear, and then it's open for emergency meetings, for emergency calls. And I once had a client or a prospect client. She called me and oh Nico, you're the best expert. I need you immediately. When do we have time? I told her, yeah, Thursday, and it was Friday. And she said, huh? I thought you were good and you're expensive and you're a genius or whatever. I don't know, remember what you told me. So how come that you have a free slot? So yeah, because I eat my own dog food or I drink my own champagne or yeah, I try to do what I preach, and that's why I still have even the next week. It's just Monday, unfortunately, because I have a trainings and other stuff. But I still look at I have 2 half days free of my week, and this was only possible because I connected with my team members, with my peers, and thought about the experience I had. I would never come with this idea just myself sitting around and thinking.
So, Nico, nothing bad about being fast. It's really a good thing, but we shouldn't overpace. And not
Mhm.
to do that, let's have a short pit stop.
Mhm.
And a surprise for you guys. The following question: if you think back, who impressed you the most as a leader and why so far? I know it's not prepared. I'm just surprising you guys. But let's see
I love
what
it.
comes up. Who and why?
You need thinking time, Nico.
I have two examples. One that impressed me really was my superior at the company I worked before. One of my superior just being happy with me. So when I achieved something great, he was also so happy, and you felt it that he's not faking it, or he has to do it now because. Uh, by the way, Mark, in Switzerland, we don't really do great parties. So when we have a success, we just say, "Yeah, great, next." We don't really celebrate successes. And I had the boss that really, when I achieved something, and was developer then, he was really with me on fire. Hey, great! It's exceptional. It's exceptional. I think it's normal. And having somebody really be with you, be happy with you, cherishing you, being a cheerleader on the side was really a great leader. Uh, yeah, this was one of the stories, and the other one I have to reshape my mind a little bit to explain it better. So I have to find vocabulary. But I hand over to somebody of you.
All right, I'll jump in. I instantly know exactly who's in my head. Um, it's an executive. I've coached her at 3 different organizations now. And, I've jumped forward to a book that is in my recommended book list, which is Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Mhm.
And, he in that book, he talks about the 5 things that you find in common in companies that sustainably outperform. And the first one he talks about is leadership. And in the intro to the book, right, he's got 5 years of academic study finding the common ingredients and, this huge history trail. And he says, look, the last thing I wanted to find was leadership. I wanted to find other things, but I couldn't get away from leadership. And he talked about this thing he called level 5 leadership. And he characterized level 5 leadership really in 2 ways. The first one, he said, when there's a problem, do you look out the window or do you look in the mirror? Right? And a level 5 leader looks in the mirror. But the
Awesome.
other thing that he called out, he said, the level 5 leader, you recognize them because the company goes on to even greater success after they leave. Right? And what they're doing is they're actually positioning for the success of those who succeed them. And so I think there's this element of leadership, which is, are you a level 5 leader? And this particular person, absolutely. But what do I know about her? I know she creates a compelling vision, right? She chases an amazing vision, but she also involves her people in creating it. And then she builds an amazing team, right? She finds the right people before she tries to go too crazy. She says, I need the right people to follow this. And then she holds the space for them. I've got a vision. You're amazing people. Let me hold the space, give you the chance to do amazing things. And that's, to me, leading by example.
Awesome stuff. I've got 2 examples. One was my brigade general. He didn't impress me by rank, but by his personality. Showing up, being able to sketch on a flip chart, where are we now? Where are we heading to? And what is my support for you guys that we succeed as a whole, right? That was always impressive. It's my brigade general, Ulrich Zwigart. Awesome personality. The second one is, and I name it as well, it's Jennifer Fawcett, a safe fellow. She was my mentor through the SPCT journey, right? That's a person who shows up, is very calm, not big words, But when she starts talking on the stage, you listen carefully and you trust her immediately when you listen to her, because you can feel there's something that how do you call it? It flows towards you, and you start being drawn into that area. And that's where real leadership for me is, right? So I hope I didn't surprise you too much, guys, with that pit stop. Let's move on. Where are the safe sources? We have lots of framework articles. First of all, the competency article, highly suggested to reread again if you haven't done yet. It's full of nuggets. Then the SPC article is a deep, deep treasure of lots of aspects towards lead by example. Then the Scrum Master team coach as well, because we know we're change agents, right? We're in a collaboration with those procedural or process authorities. And then interestingly, when I went through the implementation roadmap, I found out training executives, managers, leaders prepare for art launch. If you want to have a good blueprint, if you want to have those first win-win situations, you have to exemplify, right? It's not about doing PR planning right, having all those role-based trainings, stuff like that. Yes, that's integral part of the first few legs on the implementation roadmap, but it's more about leadership and not forgetting those who are probably not on the first train, who will then succeed you and will follow. Then principle number 8, unlock intrinsic motivation. Mark, Nico, you already tackled that, right? We're in a certain area. We are talking to people. So if I mention principle number 8 here, does anything tickle your brain regarding this dimension?
From my side, it's really also. So let's say when I read it the first time on my journey, it's years ago. I thought, so how can I unlock something? The people should be motivated themselves. But I really loved the idea of you should be somebody who enables the ground that others can grow. I use usually the gardener example, and that's also something you have to do as a leader, having an environment where others can grow. Of course, they have to grow themselves, but with the wrong environment, if I have only stones, no plant can grow, or just some plants can grow, to be honest. So
Called weeds.
Exactly. By the way, sometimes I've struggled with this example because last time I told a leader is like a gardener. Somebody told me, yeah, they dig they dig a hole, push you in, and covers you with shit. That's not the idea. I mean, it's just having a foundation to grow and not a, yeah.
It's so much fun doing this with Europeans. You'll add words to the conversation the Americans never would.
Yeah, but that's real life, Mark, you know? Without some compost, no good garden.
Do we need a beep now over my last sentence?
Probably. We have to edit
it's
it
too
out.
late. It's too late. It's there.
Right. Great.
I got to add to that a little bit. Because I think if you look at principle number 8, unlock intrinsic motivation, of course you jump into that and you get autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And autonomy, obviously, you have to link off to decentralization as a principle. But there's also, and you know, we spoke about purpose with vision, that mastery aspect, leading by example when it comes to mastery is, you know, a lot of leaders become so busy. And how does a leader take time out to grow their mastery? And if a leader's not taking time out to grow their mastery, what example are they setting for their people about the value of taking time out to achieve mastery? And it could be as simple as, do the senior execs take the 2 days out to do leading safe? Because when their middle management and their junior management turn up to do leading safe, the way in which they walk into the room is very different when they know that their senior executives have taken their 2 days to do it. And obviously, leading safe is just the tip of the iceberg. But people follow what they see. And there's often a hesitation with mastery to go, how will I be perceived if I take time off to learn? Or if I'm spending too much of my time learning instead of ticking off tasks. And the example that's set when leaders do that is huge. So, how do you model particularly the mastery aspect of autonomy, mastery, and purpose? For me, really shows up in leading by example.
Yeah, and that adds to the article about business owners, right? Because if we look at these guys, they are responsible for business and technical fitness of use, return on investment, governance, which needs a lot of exemplifying in front of the people you are responsible for, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work. So, guidance articles, I found two. The dual operating system, that's for me tied to the implementation roadmap, because in the dual operating system, we have the network, which is geared towards being sustainably shortest lead time to value delivery. And we have the line organization, the hierarchical organization. So in both aspects or both dimensions, we should have leaders who are really exemplifying what to do, how to do it, and supporting people. And another guidance article I found really helpful is evolving role of managers in lean agile development. So courses and enablements, for sure, leading safe. That's how it starts at an early point of the implementation roadmap, right? Sometimes even before the tipping point. How do we raise the awareness? It's not only about applying something or doing copy paste, it's much more. It's again lead by example. If you don't know what you lead, how do you lead correctly? How do you exemplify the content, right? And the other course I find very helpful is Leading in the Digital Age, the first module, module Leading by Example, especially for senior managers who are responsible for the transformation. Then in Safe Studio, videos and blogs, there's an abundance of articles, podcasts, and blogs. One of them I really liked is How Executives Make or Break Transformations. It's by example, right? Again. Then the role of emotional intelligence in SAFe, and number 4, unparalleled value of emotional intelligence. We need intelligent emotional leaders because it needs certain input to exemplify that stuff. And the other one is leaders as insatiable learners. That's the stuff I found very helpful. And Nico, you shot me a message that you would like to add something. Just shoot.
Exactly. In the courses, what's also a great course, I like the RT training of Scaled Agile, but it's difficult depending on who is giving the training because it's a training back of the room, a lot of discussions, and there, if you have a trainer who has a weight in it in developing leaders, then you discuss a lot about leadership. So the last training I had with the RT training I had was about, is the RT really coaching the POs or not? And we discussed it very well, very long. And the problem is when you go and coach too deep as an RT, you just send a message that your Scrum Masters are not able to doing it. So it's also about what messages do I send, and not only what I'm doing. And we had a really cool conversation that as a leader, sometimes you have to enable others to lead, and you cannot lead everybody just because you're high enough. And we had a nice discussion, but just appeared because the people want to talk about it, and appeared because I love this topic. So yeah, you can have bad luck and just have somebody just doing the arty stuff, and you can have one of us maybe. They will talk a little bit more about everything else. So RT training could be something great, could also be something wrong.
Thank you very much. Really helpful. Let's move on. Mark, you already started with one of the books. I would like to hand over the talking stick to you.
So I've already told the Good to Great story it's foundational for me. Um, it's the 5 common threads of what takes companies from good to great. Number one's leadership. So, if you don't want to read the whole book, you just read number 1. But I'll tell you, if you read number 1, you won't be able to stop and you'll have to finish the book. Turn the Ship Around. I thought, again, it's been there in the safe material as a short video for quite a while. It's now very central to the decentralization principle guidance, but it's also a brilliant story of leading by example. I also love The Advantage from Patrick Lencioni. You've probably heard about him from The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He's actually written quite a few books. The Advantage kind of loops together 5 or 6 of his previous books into a bit of a recipe for a leadership team. I think there's some great stuff in that. Going completely different direction, American Icon by Bryce Hoffman. So that's the story of Alan Mulally turning Ford around. And in terms of that notion of a leader who makes incredibly clear expectations about what is expected of a leader and is relentless in using an example to change a leadership culture of a very large company in turbulent times, it's a brilliant read. It really was quite phenomenal. And of course, can't get away from my obsession with the 5th discipline. I mentioned it last week. I'm going to mention it again this week. There's so much for a leader about the habits you have to build. So, yeah, that's me.
Cool. Nico brings in some German or European flavor.
Exactly. I just thought I need a +1 button there just to order things immediately because 2 books are not on my list, so I need to shop them now. Thank you, Mark. Now 2 more books to read. In my case, what I've chosen was Leadership is Language. It's the next book, I think, after Turn the Ship Around from David Marquet. He was there for a conference in Switzerland, and I got a signed book. Yeah, and I read it. It's also about, as a leader, not talking too much. It's also about what I said at the beginning. Just let others talk, let others lead via questions, lead via the kind of way you're setting the environment. Goes also about what you said before, unlock the intrinsic motivation. So how you speak to enable such an environment was really also the next great book after Turn the Ship Around. I was really surprised. I thought, okay, maybe it's the same as before, but it was really going about how you talk. Then I have 2 books from Ruth Seliger. She's from Austria. She's a systemic coach, and she wrote a lot of stuff about many books about leadership. The last she wrote was about how we change society, because now she's getting older and older, and she always goes one layer higher and higher. The latest one, or before that, was also translated to English, A Jungle Book of Leadership. I read the German one, but I looked for the English one. And the one, Positive Leadership, die Revolution in der Führung, it's also a great one. And both are about reflecting how I am, reflecting about myself. That's what about leading by example. Lead yourself first. They have some chapters about that. And the very last was the first book I read about how are you, what triggers you, what helps you, what are your resources? Because everybody has a package, and the package is an advantage. So how can you use the package you have to be much more better in self-management? And I didn't find it in English, so you have now 2 German books. Yeah, that's life. That's a lot much more than English books.
Cool. Thank you very much. One book was introduced to me by my mate Sasha Zudek, How We Learn from Dehaney. If I want to improve, I probably first have to understand how we learn. And it's written by a person who has deep knowledge about what happens in our brain, what is neuroscience, how we learn, and highly suggested if you find time, if you really want to invest, how you learn, how you react as a person, how we learn. The second book, It's probably not a typical safe book. It's Extreme Ownership, written by 2 ex-Navy SEALs. I probably can't hide my military past.
No,
These guys don't describe what SEALs did or do, but they describe how you take extreme ownership. And taking ownership, again, is tied to how you exemplify in the collaboration of a team, or if you have various teams together, right? And leadership, they describe it very vividly. It's not only the so-called leaders, the managers, the high-ranking people, it's everyone in the team who can take leadership at the given time. So that brings us probably back to when we said, what is the context we are using this dimension? It's everywhere. It applies to everyone, and we shouldn't forget that. Then Dare to Lead from Brené Brown. Awesome book. The title says it all, right?
you stole that one from me. You know that, right?
I know, I know, Mark. It's one of these awesome books. Just read it, and I always say, not only read it, inhale it, right? And the one from Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It shows how they challenged their beliefs, their perception, and their worldview, right? How you perceive something probably lets you take part of this part of the world or not as a leader. And if I want to be a good example, I probably have to first learn, how I perceive stuff, how I challenge myself. And that leads back to one of the past episodes we already had, right? If we are not challenging ourselves, we're probably not getting into this learning habit and closing the gaps. Happy for your recommendations, guys. What else should we throw into the ring? I would like to start with Nico. You brought up some general aspects we should consider.
Exactly. So, because we are all distributed over the world, just look in your country, in your environment, what for leadership trainings are there. Some are just buzzwords, other have more underneath. Talk to your peers, talk to your mentors, talk to your coaches. Which one could be a good idea for you? I learned a lot via these trainings. Sometimes I just go to one, and this week a colleague called me and told me, "You really want to participate? We should co-teach this." I told her, "Yeah. I can be just the tech supporter. I don't want to teach it. I just want to see how you're doing it." And then we agreed. I'm the tech supporter in the background, not a normal participant. But I love when people don't know me, just be there and be a participant. I was last year with a competitor in Germany, just a participant. Then they realized who I am and then started to involving me. But I just want to see how they doing it. So go to such leadership trainings. There are many of them. At least in my environment, I think I can go every month to one of them. Then something I called it awareness training. There we have to be careful because sometimes it's quite esoteric. What I mean with that is trainings where you as a leader try to go on a meta level. So how do I get messages? How do I react in meetings? What is my standard pattern reacting? And be aware when, for instance, you, Stefan, say a trigger word to me that I realize, oh, it's a trigger word. It's not you. It's just something from my history. And it's something you learn in such an awareness training. But be careful there, at least in my environment, there are some awareness trainings. They are quite esoteric and not for leaders. You have to find out, again, talk to your peers, talk to your colleagues. And one of the first things I did as a developer was an emotional intelligence training. Sounds also strange, but was also about finding out what are my resources. So what does doing well to me? What helps me in becoming a better person, a better reader, leader, not a reader. A reader would be nice. A better leader was really important to realize. For me, for instance, it was important to become much more calmer. And after this training, some people told me in the feedback, "You are der Fels in der Brandung. You are a stone when big floods are coming and big waves are coming." And I said, "Okay, it helped." Because before I was just let's just and now there are environments in professional setups where really I can be so calm And this training was one of the first things to realize what are my powers, what are my resources. I can activate it, and I can tell you a secret. For me now, it's bound with the color blue. So whenever I realize I'm going out of control, I just need something blue. That's why my desktop is blue. So when I realize, it doesn't go well, I just can minimize my window. I see a blue background of a sea. I start smelling the salty water. I start hearing the waves, and then I can calm down and help my team and help the people I'm leading and help myself. This was one of the takeaways years ago. I think it's 20 years ago. Yeah, a personal story too.
Thanks, Nico. I think all of these topics that you mentioned are important for a leader, right? And I spotted something on the buffet, Mark. But before we do that, just my 5 cents. I like safe summits or any conferences where I meet inspirational leaders, right? Through a talk, through a keynote, through some coffee discussions, you spot those people. And that's why I go to summits. That's why I go to conferences. And it's really helpful. Now to the
And I love
dessert
and
on, yeah,
sorry, and I
Nico.
love the blue summits are blue, so I can relax. Sorry.
That's okay. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. I will demand for a color change. So let's go to the dessert on the buffet. Unleashing
So,
scale. I had never seen that on the buffet.
well, Eric would never do this himself. But Eric Willicke, another part of the Shaping Agility community, has been developing an Unleashing Scale mentoring program. And he's running it as a cohort-based solution where it's a series of small lessons with a chance to apply them, and then sort of shared processing on what you learn from applying them. He's just taken it live. I've been one of his reviewers for a lot of the content he's been putting together as he bounces ideas off. I think it's going to be phenomenal. So, you know, somewhere in our own backyard. Could be great.
Perfect. Further thoughts, further ideas, stuff you would like to convey to the listeners of this streaming series.
Well, I'm
I
going to
will
keep the mic because I've already got it, right?
go for it.
You stole a Brene Brown book from me. Well, actually, you didn't steal it from me. I paid the price of being late. But not everybody reads books. But I'll tell you what, Brene Brown did a TED talk on vulnerability back. And it was funny, I went looking for the URL. It was 2010.
Yeah.
And such an amazing talk. But it also, I think the concept of vulnerability, and, you know, her core message is, you know, vulnerability is the first thing I want to see in you and the last thing I want you to see in me. But the power of being willing to be vulnerable yourself in what that invites in somebody else, I just can't overstate it enough. And quite often as a coach, right? Because, you know, I'll be coaching an executive and I'll also be coaching 3 or 4 layers down the organization. And I'll listen to people talking and the beliefs they have about who the executive is or how they'll react to a situation. And I'll sit there and I go, you just don't know this person. Because the executive I'll know and the one that they think they work for are 2 very different people. And so I will find ways to enable them to understand, like the leader to show up and show people who they really are and cut through the misconceptions. And so often that's about vulnerability. And, you know, I saw 2 amazing examples of that this week. I saw one, it was a leader who was personally in turmoil, personally was lacking a lot of clarity about what was in their immediate future, leading a group of people who also had a lot of unknowns, a lot of questions, and needed the reassurance. And he stood up and he, you know, we were talking about it the night before, and he said, what can I say, right? These are the only things I know. And I said, look, if you can stand up and say, there are a lot of things I don't know. I do know these things, and I know I'm going to be there to lead you through it. That'll help. And he stood, and he was visibly struggling, right? He normally never uses notes. He had notes in his hand, but his willingness to stand in front of that room full of people and have that vulnerability and say, I don't know all the answers. These are the answers I do know, and I'll be there for you. The impact that made on that room full of people was huge. And it was a moment of transcendence for him in his relationship with that room full of people as a leader, his willingness to be vulnerable. So, yeah, if you want to lead by example, vulnerability is an amazing place to begin. So that's the vulnerability plug. The other one is, I think, book clubs are a great way to learn together. Peter Senge in The Fifth Discipline, he talks about the difference between dialogue and discussion. And the notion of discussion is where you're comparing ideas to see which one wins. And dialogue is where you're holding your ideas out for examination with the hope that new ideas will emerge. And there's a very different dynamic involved. And if you look at any book on teamwork, any study on teamwork, it'll say, to be a great team, to be generative, you have to learn to do conflict healthily. And where I've had leadership groups that did book clubs together, read a book, did a chapter a week in a leadership session, I've seen it numerous times. It's a leadership group who didn't know how to have conflict. And so they struggled to gain forward path. And we'd take them into a book club and they would be able to have conflict about what they saw in the book, right? Because it was promoting a discussion. What did you think this meant? What did you think? And they learned to do conflict in this safe place in the book club. And then they took it back into who they were as a leadership group. And the skill that they'd gained in their ability to navigate conflict together came back in. And that only ever happened, right? The first time we did it was a group of reasonably senior leaders who would never have done it if their boss hadn't said, we are going to do it and I'm going to be there with you every time, which is back to leading by example. So create moments where you're together with a group of people in dialogue rather than discussion.
I'm impressed since we are recording these episodes how like-minded we are, yet we have different positions, different perspectives, right? And when it comes to vulnerability and transparency, probably two things I would like to throw in and add to what Mark just mentioned, the TED Talks from Brené Brown on vulnerability. Make your roadmap public. Makes you less vulnerable because people know what you do, where you are, when you are there. And if you're a good leader, and if you're able to hire people, you hopefully hire better people than you are. So they cover your white spots, your gaps immediately. And because they have the roadmap you are on, they jump in. And it's less and less about being vulnerable. It's more about being transparent and showing where we are heading to. And I call it my personal roadmap should be transparent. Even if I'm talking to my wife, right? Sometimes we live under the same roof, but sometimes my roadmap is not transparent to hers because I'm deeply into my professional work. How can she participate? And my back office is really working in a splendid way. I don't have to order cookies or coffee. It just comes in. So for me, being transparent and doing Gemba is also something, and I've learned that again through my professional work, also through my military services. Sometimes you have to be in your office and you have to do some thinking, you have to do some staff work, but be as much as possible with your peeps, with your people. And that's where it happens, right? Now handing back the talking stick to my passionate comrade, Nico.
Thank you, thank you. I also would like to jump in on vulnerability because in my environment, I don't know if it's Switzerland or if it's Germany, Switzerland, or it's just my environment. Some people have a wrong image about vulnerability. It's not, and it's not about going on stage and crying publicly how mean your dad was because he was alcoholic and just hit you every day or every Saturday. It's not about this. It's not a stage show. Vulnerability is having the chance to be open with somebody. And there comes my second point here. Reflect with peers, have a mentoring session. So having somebody you can really be open and say what's inside, what bothers you. For instance, a colleague of mine told me he's in a divorce now, and it was so easier for him when he opened that up that we can work on professional stuff after I knew that. So it's really saying things, but not public on stage and making a show, and everybody's now crying. And hey, great, we had now a vulnerability event with the team. Now we grew together because everybody cried on stage. That's not vulnerability. It's about you being open. And maybe I'm open to Stefan and not to Mark because we have a connection, or because I have a Mark a different connection. I don't know, but it's being open, being able to open somebody, and it's why I think reflecting with peers, having a mentoring session, it's a cool thing. I'm a little bit afraid of deja vu, so I would like to bring some stories because I think I brought all these bullet points the last episodes. So mentoring is for me important because it's a bidirectional communication. So you say something, you get help, and the same slot, the same meeting, you can help the other person too. Sometimes it's more consulting, sometimes it's more coaching, but it's a bidirectional approach. And at the end, both gain profit by coaching and by being coached. But it's still not a coaching. With coaching, it's for me something more. It's really thinking about it's what Mark just explained. For me, this is a coaching, helping somebody reflecting via his vulnerability, becoming a better leader. And the other thing, engage with teams, was also a deja vu. An example, one of the leaders I met years ago, when he became a chief of 400 people, he gave up his single office. He was alone in an office with curtains and chairs and his own door, and he went out to the big office where everybody sit together. And he switched table from day to day, and he was so appreciated by everybody in the room. He knew all the names of everybody. He knew the families. He knew the skills, the sorrows. And he told me when he quitted, the biggest mistake he did is going back to his single office back. There was his biggest mistake because then he was again not on the same eye level. So engage with teams could mean for you as a C-level people, just get rid of your office. And okay, of course, you need it for phone calls and secret stuff you're doing, confidential stuff you're doing, but just look for a place outside with the teammates that helps you a lot. Finished.
Awesome. Nico, you opened the barrel about misconceptions about this dimension,
Yeah.
like anti-patterns, misinterpretations. And I would like to kick it off. Authority. We started with earned authority, and there's a big difference between authority and earned authority, right? Misusing a rank, a hierarchy, and also a responsibility towards the social system is not good, right? And that ties directly back to how you exemplify, how you interpret, and how you live a certain rank, a certain hierarchy. You're a role model. If you don't walk the talk, tough times ahead, right? We all know that people are not dumb. They don't tell the truth. They don't say anything, but you can read their body language. You can look at their faces and you immediately know something's wrong. And then the cultural aspect, if you have an environment, I've seen that over and over again when we start implementations, if we start collaborations at scale, sometimes this fear and this toxic environment, we're not allowed to tell the truth, but everyone knows the truth. Why don't we spell it out, right? And those I hate them. I must tell you, I hate them. Those weather vanes instead of signposts, right? If the wind blows this way, that's how they talk. If the wind changes, they talk the other way around, right? Nobody knows where to go to, what to do, and you kind of don't provide this certainty of behavior. for people. Who would start first here now? Mark or Nico? What are your thoughts about misconceptions about this dimension?
Looks like Nico's waiting for me.
Yeah, I just had a blue collar. No.
All right. So Stefan's already talked about walking the talk and the words versus actions. I'm going to talk about copying instead of internalizing, because leadership it's about authenticity, and you can't copy somebody else's leadership style, right? The minute a group of people perceives that you are lacking authenticity, the authority that they grant you is fundamentally compromised. And I've seen a lot of people and leaders who they want to change, but they try to copy another leader, or they read a book and they try to copy the ideas in the book, instead of finding how to take the principles and interpret it in a way that's authentic to themselves. I actually hit a point a few years ago where I stopped reading leadership books, because I'd read so many books about different styles of leadership, and they all fundamentally said the same thing, but it was a different set of gimmicks. And, I'd try them on, I'd try them on, I'd try them on. It's like, no, I've actually found the leadership style that fits me. And so don't turn around taking some words or actions that you've seen another leader take. Right? Find the way to be you, modeling the principles, because you just can't copy it.
Perfect. Nico.
It's exactly that what I mean with you play a role. You just think you have to behave that way, and then you're not authentic, which is one of the rules as a leader. You have to find your style. I realized during COVID that I say so many things about myself, that if somebody had recorded it, they can destroy my whole life and my whole career or whatever, because I'm really open when I lead. That's the way I'm leading. I'm really open, and people open up too. And I need this connection. Otherwise, it doesn't work for me. I know some people lead differently. My wife once got the tip. She has to be much more professional, more distant, more colder. And she told to her boss, "No, sorry, it's not the way I'm leading. So find your style, not playing a role. It's really, really important." An anti-pattern is seeing everything as an ingredient for your career. So really optimizing yourself. What do I need next to become one higher, to get more money, my second car, my third house, my fifth boat, or whatever? It's an anti-pattern. People will realize that you're not a leader. You're just hunting something, and it's your own success. For me, also an anti-pattern, which many leaders fall in this trap, is the parent reflex. That's how I call it. It's just do it yourself because you're faster. So I remember tying the notes of the shoes of my kids because we had to leave and the bus is going and we have to run, and it's much more easier. You can't imagine how many times we just lost the bus because I thought, I want to do it. They have to learn it. So it's not my job as a leader. Do it. It's to explain. It's help them, etc. That's why I'm calling parent reflex. It's the story I have in my head. And the last anti-pattern, also seen by many leaders, it's associated with a wind thing. You said, Stefan, is not trying to change and challenge the system. You have to change the system. There are people working in the system and people on the system. And you as a leader, you work on the system. You have to change it. You're not the one preaching something, saying something, and then say, yeah, it's our company, it's bad. Trying during business hours doing that. And when you go for a beer, you say the opposite and you complain. As a leader, you don't complain. You just do it. You attack the system, you tackle the system, you try to change the system. That's your job.
Let me quickly sum it up what I just heard from you guys. Copying never works. That's what Mark said, right? We can admire others. We probably can learn from others, but never ever copy other people. Being authentic, challenging ourselves, challenging the system helps quite a lot. And if we don't do it, we probably miss some opportunities. Opportunities and pain points. For me, one of the opportunities as a good example is you create a tidal wave, right, of good behavior. You're probably the catalyst. Others join you, and we all know a tidal wave is a tidal wave. You either surf or you drown, right? So I'd like to have lots of others serving with me on that tidal wave. And then the other aspect that I can see, which is huge, so huge, and I still don't get it as the whole entity. If you develop behavioral confidence because you exemplify, others do it as well, you start eliminating uncertainty for the social system and how to act, creating behavioral certainty is a huge benefit because we are still tackling a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the engagement, to creating value, to delivering value, right? We don't know what we don't know. And if we have a misleading behavioral structure or misleading behavioral examples, then we have too many. In Germany, we call them Baustellen, construction sites, and people fall into those holes. And we are never, ever on a smooth path towards the North Star. So for me, it's about servant leadership. You model, you promote, you communicate, you exemplify. So, and with that opportunity, you create something that determines the degree of an organization's ability to achieve goals, which is again the ultimate goal. We want to achieve goals, we want to have customer centricity, and I'm a part of it. And the big pain point and the big kind of constraint on any system, be it social or also a technical system, and now we're talking about the social system, is that if we only have leadership and authority that is not earned, it diminishes the people's commitment. End of PI planning, we want a set of committed PI objectives. That has a lot to do with examples over 1.5 days or 2 days. So people happily stand up, show their 3s and 4s and 5s, and have a commitment, right? Oh, I'm jumping too far. Nico,
Yes.
what kind of opportunities and pain points do you see?
So one big opportunity for me is, as said before, you can only lead others when you know how to lead yourself, is to get to know yourself a little bit better. And listen to your biography. It is a huge resource. What doesn't kill you makes you strong. Yeah, look back. What can you do well? Where are your resources? Learn much about yourself, because as Mark said, you cannot copy paste somebody else. You can just grow from yourself and become a leader. And with that, you have to become a learner and somebody reading book clubs, going to book clubs, going to conferences, going to trainings. You have to be a learner too, because our world at the moment requires people who learn, not people who know everything, because tomorrow the world has changed. So you have to be on pace. I had to know how this whole environment and streaming works. Never streamed before. And now I have a streaming deck, by the way, my new thing. So I really have to learn and experiment. That's also part of it, even if it's for fun. And usually, yeah, work is also life, so it's also fun. The other thing, yeah, self-awareness. Realize, I think I said it several times. I think I'm not important. Of course, I'm important as a person, but I never think in a meeting or in a talk or even here. I don't think I'm the smartest guy and I have to say everything I know. Sometimes it doesn't fit, and I'm quiet. It will fit a different time. So being self-aware about when to say what and when to just play the second role, when let others shine as a leader. It's also an important thing. Let other people shine. I remember once a leader said, uh, when you're successful, send a team. When you're not successful, go yourself on stage and take the blame. So all these things are part of being aware who you are and being aware of your role and how important you are for the system. And the last thing is to change the system. I'm also Greek. My DNA is Greek, even if I'm socialized in Switzerland. That's why I always say dance with the system. If you cannot change it, dance with it. You find some boundaries. You can bend a little bit over it, but if you can change it, dance with the system.
I really like that, Nico. And I hope we can have a goes sometime in the near future. Mark, opportunities, pain points.
Look, for me, the opportunity is just about amplifying
You're
your
on mute,
impact.
Mark. Sorry.
For me, thank you. It's nice to be the one being reminded. I feel the embarrassment I give you guys. Amplifying your impact, right? The more that you step into leading by example, and let me tell you, you won't be that person overnight, right? You will experiment, you will step into it, you will test it, and you will see things change. And when you see things change, that will encourage you to go deeper. And the deeper you go into leading by example, the bigger the impact you'll have. That's your opportunity. The pain point I wanted to call out, and I'd already kind of talked about the authenticity aspect, so I'm going to talk about the pain point of coaching. Right? Because there's a moment where as an SPC, you're coaching somebody in the space of leading by example. And I think, the comment I said here was letting your intervention or your provocation outpace your trust. You've got to earn the right or earn the authority to question or challenge somebody about their leadership style, their authenticity, the way in which they're leading by example. And you've got to sense where your relationship is at and what right you've earned to provide the provocation. Or, to be cheesy about it, you've got to lead by example as a coach. You've got to earn the authority to coach a leader.
Yeah. I would like to stay a few more minutes on that topic, Mark, and because it really resonates with me, and I would like to throw in imposter syndrome, right? I've seen many coaches with so many talents, but degrading themselves back to a position where they shouldn't be. And you said you must lead by example as a coach. Sometimes you have to step over that line where you think, oh, I'm probably not able to do it, or I'm probably not there. What are your thoughts when you think about this one?
I think every key growth moment in my coaching career has involved stepping over one of those lines, going somewhere. And I've probably from a vulnerability perspective, I've coached from vulnerability for a very long time. Because for me, coaching is about trust, and trust is vulnerability. But there are different aspects of vulnerability. I had a moment this week where, to be in the moment, I had to be at another level of vulnerability beyond what I would normally be. My words at the time, I think as a coach, your job is to provide the center of calmness as other people navigate emotional turmoil. I was in a situation where I had an awful lot of emotion happening inside me. And I actually very publicly acknowledged the emotion happening in me. And it was interesting, right? I'm still processing the reflection from that. I think I will be for another week or two, of what happens when you stretch just another level. What permission does that give other people?
Which is a huge example. And Nico, any thoughts about imposter syndrome, stepping over that line, stretching your perhaps even comfort zone, or you
Yeah.
feel safe being an example?
I think stretching your own comfort zone is the only way you can go to movement. Otherwise, you stick in your world and in your old patterns. You can only learn new patterns when you go out of your comfort zone. Well, I just wrote three words down while Mark was talking. So for me, important thing is be respectful and honest. So if you know you step a boundary, be still respectful, because or be honest and say, I've never been in this situation. Can you explain me more about it? Or had you had similar situations? Because I've never been in the situation. I've never been in that role. So you can still coach with this kind of respect. I told, I think, the last episode, those people having becoming SPC after 4 days and then going to CEOs and say, "Come on, old guy, I'm gonna explain you how the world is working now." That's completely no acknowledgement for the way, the path they've taken as a leaders. no respect. And I think acknowledge what the people have achieved, be respectful with them, and be honest. What you know, what you don't know, will make you a great coach, and will get a great, can you say bondage? A great connection to each other. You can't say bondage, thank you. Connection.
You could say bond.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is, okay. So that's when you have non-native speaker in a call.
We're learning, Nico. We're learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
No bondage anymore. Yeah.
Okay. So any further, you mentioned a few words you took or notes you took. Anything to add here, Nico? Or
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the
Cool.
question.
Okay. So let's try to summarize. The final question. If you guys were to distill your experience and understanding of lead by example into a single piece of advice or mantra or what else for aspiring servant leaders, what would that be? You know, it's shortly before Christmas. Surprise, surprise.
So for me, leading is not pushing, and leading it starts with the man in the mirror. Lead yourself, Mark
Perfect.
or Stefan.
For me, it's find feedback. I think for a leader, you have to build self-reflection and reflection practices in, but you can't see what you can't see. And we all have very strong mental models of who we think we are. And even as you build reflection practices, you will see things in that reflection filtered through your own mental model. And particularly for more senior leaders, it's very hard to get honest feedback because people respect the hierarchy too much to give you the real feedback. And you need to find somebody who has the courage to help you to see your own mental model and where your blinkers are. And whether that's a coach or a peer or somebody that you lead who has the courage to act in that way for you, find somebody who can give you the feedback that draws your attention to the areas you need to grow in the way that you lead by example.
I would like to conclude this interesting discussion again with you guys by this statement of Jennifer Fawcett. She came up with in 2017. We also have to have empathy expressed throughout the social system in order to evolve the information coherence to enable the development process. Being empathetic, being in the system, on the system, creating this environment where information flows, where information coherence is really tangible. And we together, we go into the future, we see the North Star. And through our example as a leader, we help people achieving much better output, outcome, and impact over the time. And with that, I would like to hand back the talking stick to Mark.
All right. Hey, what do you know? We're 8 minutes ahead. Kept the pace. So I see that you've prepared a retro for us, Stefan. And again, in keeping with our typical format, this is if you are here just to take the standard content. We are done with the standard content. We are now leading by example and thinking about retrospection and continuous improvement. But I'm going to actually propose that we waste the careful preparation you did, because we've now done 5 episodes and we've iterated and iterated and iterated and no, boy, those little tweaks we've made have felt good. But I was reflecting during the week, I feel I'd like to do an inspect and adapt and actually propose, because next week is possibly, I'm not sure whether we'll do 2 more episodes for the year or 1 more. But I'd like to propose that we actually do a reflection next week and say, now that we've iterated 5 times on the show format, what happens if we zoom out and structure a retrospective around the 5 iterations and perhaps the foundational questions that we would ask ourselves about the way we originally structured it?
I love the idea, Mark. That means adapting as we go, different format next week. And hopefully we have people joining us, listening and contributing through some chat injection, how we proceed over that time.
So I'm definitely going to be doing some data gathering with people I know have been watching. I have some thoughts over how we data gather for ourselves. So I'll put myself on duty to actually structure the reflection. But I just think I found myself with patterns and different levels of energy for different pieces of the preparation. And particularly, I'm finding very different energy for the powerful questions than I am for the lists of safe articles. So I'd like to suggest we think about what that means to us.
It's cool, but this means we will not reach our deadline because now we need one episode more. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But for this episode, I would like to give a feedback to Stefan. I really loved. For me, was the best episode of all the 5. Was really a cool interaction. Many surprising questions. For me, was much more open at the beginning. So we are now in a pace when we can just give things around. So I really loved this episode. Just for this episode as a feedback. Will be hard for the next moderating this. So it was really the best episode for me until now.
I would echo that sentiment. I liked the extra bit of work you'd done on the polish, on the layout, and some of the provocation there. I loved your pit stop in the middle, because I think that moment when you stopped us in the middle took us deeper. By the time we got to the end, I felt we were really sitting quite deep in it, as opposed to traveling across the surface of the topic. I'm not sure if that's translating in the English. So yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it. And I kept looking, going, we're having a really deep conversation. We must be out of time. And then I'd glance at my watch and go, no, time boxes are good. So that's your preparation and hosting for us, Stefan. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. But may I quickly pick up the thread you put in, Mark? I would love to really go into a deeper retrospective after those first episodes. Like Nico said, milestones are milestones. Normally they are homemade. You can change that. If it's not customer centric, let's change it, right? So let's keep that in mind. And yeah, maybe even changing the format if needed, or reducing the format to the bare minimum, so that we can attract also more SPCs, change agents, coaches to join us, right? Because shaping agility, as you started it with Eric, Mark, is really something we need to understand. What are the ingredients? What are the principles? What are the practices for to then adapt it and contextualize it into the different transformation environments? Yeah, I love it. That's perfect. I'm looking forward to next week, and count me in when it comes to changing the format or certain structural elements.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, gents. Have a good week, unless you decide you're in the mood to rejoin us for Saturday, whatever we're going to talk about, sessions in a few hours. And I'm going to take us to the outro.